Rufus Shinra, the secondary antagonist of Final Fantasy VII, rich, strong, arrogant, ruthless, and above all else, complex. Rufus's character is easily one of the most interesting characters of FF7, and a hero of sorts in his own right. But what makes a character so interesting? Is it that you can identify with them or their struggle? Or maybe you get a kick out of determining what makes someone do what they do? So you're probably asking, why Rufus Shinra, out of all the characters in the FF7 universe, would be considered interesting or complex? He's entertaining, sure, with his over-the-top style and role in the story, but there are so many other complex characters within the world of Final Fantasy VII like that, each of whom have had several long analysis videos made of them. You have the more pronounced characters like Aerith, Tifa, and Cloud, the last of whom I've already made my own overly long analysis video. You also have, of course, the iconic villain, Sephiroth. And that's not even mentioning the other minor characters, optional characters, secondary villains. You get the idea. There are tons of characters in this game, all of which are fleshed out relatively well over the course of the games, spin-offs, and extended universe material. So to reiterate, why Rufus Shinra? Why is he the hero in his own story, when he himself is nothing more than a thorn in the side of the main characters whose goal is to save the world? Well, in the 7 basic archetypes of storytelling, he falls within the rebirth redemption category, which happens to be my favorite. Now, why is this my favorite? Well, I always found the character type where someone comes from a place of ill repute, learns a lesson, and becomes a better person fascinating. Not to say I don't enjoy Cloud's overcoming of his past, or Cid's adversity in going into space, or even Vincent accepting his failures and stopping Sephiroth before he started. We have a character whose purpose was to cause trouble for the hero, and through the circumstances in which he found himself, was brought to a better level of perception and thus made into a better person. Still with me? Well, let's break this down because there's a lot of ground to cover. Oh, and before we get to that, in case you're wondering what my opinion of Rufus was over the years, it was pretty much this the whole time. Okay, let's begin. For the sake of simplicity, I'll be going with the original continuity for this video, since the remake story is ongoing. Well, where do we begin? Rufus's backstory isn't touched on at all in the original game. In fact, he doesn't enter the game until several hours in when his father, President Shinra, dies. He's not even mentioned yet before that. He is known throughout the world as the Vice President, but still little is said of him. Aerith mentions that no one's ever seen him bleed or cry, and given his speech to Cloud's crew, he intends to rule Shinra, and by proxy, the world, with an iron fist. This results in a one-on-one fight in which Rufus runs away when his defeat is assured. After this, Cloud and crew have several encounters with him throughout the game. Though the two don't necessarily impede each other, Cid's plane and the public execution being the exceptions, there is a race of sorts to track down Sephiroth. Rufus to keep him from terrorizing the public and embarrassing Shinra, and Cloud because, well... But wait. That's not the beginning. The most beginning we're going to get from any game in the chronology is from Before Crisis Final Fantasy VII, a mobile game released only in Japan in 2004. This takes place 5 years before FF7, when Rufus is already 20 years old. It's in this game you learn that Rufus is in fact the main financer of the first incarnation of Avalanche, a much larger and more ruthless version than the one we see in FF7. While he himself has no real interest in saving the planet as they do, he does use his position as the vice president to feed them information and try to wrench power away from his father by way of eventual assassination, until the Turks get involved. The Turks themselves have much larger numbers as well during this time. This is where it gets kind of hairy, so I'll try my best to make this as concise as possible. The Turks in Avalanche 1 begin many conflicts, but they're evenly matched.
When it becomes apparent to Shinra that Rufus is the mole, Veld, the leader of the Turks at this time, orders for the arrest of Rufus. At the same time, Rufus is betrayed by Avalanche 1. Veld abandons his position in order to pursue his long-lost daughter, who leads Avalanche 1, an act that can lead to his execution, as death is the only way out of being a Turk. In this action, the other Turks defect and kidnap Rufus, holding him hostage, and attempt to use him as leverage against the president to have Veld spared. In the ensuing chaos of the game's climax, many of the Turks in Avalanche 1 disappear. Rufus is eventually saved and intervenes with the remaining Turks' execution for their insubordination, as the leaders of the initial Avalanche 1 are killed, quote-unquote, by Song. Rufus demands the remaining Turks' loyalty as penance for their betrayal, something for which Reno is incredibly grateful upon his own reflection. As punishment for his crimes, Rufus is placed under house arrest and kept under close watch. While he doesn't appear in Crisis Core, it is mentioned that he is on a long-term business trip, presumably in Junon, where one can only assume is where he was for the next 5 years. So what happens after that? Well, you probably know the story as it picks up in FF7, and in case you forgot, here's the SparkNotes version. Rufus assumes the presidency, tries to steal Cid's plane, witnesses the weapons awaking on the planet, stages a public execution of our main characters, mounts a defensive measure against Sapphire Weapon, and tries to send a rocket into space to blow up Meteor. When that doesn't work, he takes the Junon cannon to Midgard to destroy the barrier at the northern crater and gets blown up by Diamond Weapon. The end. Well, no, it's not the end. Advent Children was released in 2005, where Rufus is very much alive. Despite the film taking place 2 years after the game, Rufus's survival is kept a secret from Cloud's group somehow. I guess nobody questioned who was giving the orders during that time? At the time of this film's release, it was never revealed how Rufus survived. Sure, the dialogue implies that the writers were aware Cloud should have been inquisitive.
The day of the explosion.
What do you want from me?
I managed to get out
Who
of
were the
building
guys that attacked me?
before it collapsed.
I'm leaving.
But they just give a cop-out. In fact, the Play Arts figurine for Rufus Shinra even says he somehow survives. See? But it isn't until Advent Children Complete was released in 2009 that the series of novellas, On the Way to a Smile, were released, touching on what the main characters went through after the game. Tifa has one, Yuffie has one, Barrett and Vincent have one, and yes, Shinra characters get their own one as well. The Case of Shinra episode follows Rufus and the Turks during various stages of the original game, some preceding events of the game, and the game's aftermath. Rufus's parts in particular focus on his escape from Diamond Weapon's explosion and the events leading up to Advent Children, and a little bit of his past before the events of Before Crisis. The escape of Rufus is now revealed, an escape chute built under his desk that was installed when the building was constructed. While using it, he recalls a time when his father shows him the building plans for the Shinra building, and a young 5-year-old Rufus points out that if an enemy attacks from above, his father would have no means to escape. Rufus is callously told that he'll have one put in, but it won't be for himself. It'll be for Rufus, marking it with the large L for loser should he use it. We'll touch more on this part of Rufus's life later. Even though his father used the escape chute's construction as a means to insult Rufus, it does indeed wind up saving his life, to which Rufus is grateful. And to add insult to literal injury, President Shinra has L's posted all over the safe room to where the chute leads. Rufus is aware of this and has a laugh despite his injuries. For a while, he contemplates his death and where his spirit will go. He thinks about his place in the universe and wonders if he'll see his father on the other side. After spending some time healing up, he guesses the passcode and is able to escape the bunker where he's later found by his Turks. He's brought to medical attention, then is brought to calm, just as Meteor and Holy begin their destruction. In the aftermath, Rufus, still recovering from his injuries and wheelchair-bound, orders his Turks to gather intel on the situation in Midgard. Song insists one of them stay behind to protect him, but Rufus declines. He is left alone in the barricaded safe house with nothing but a pistol for self-defense. And no good redemption arc is complete without our character going through some sort of hellish experience, right? Well, at this point in the story, Rufus's hell is only beginning. During the Turks' absence, Rufus's safe house is invaded by a small mob. And since the pistol would be useless against a group of people, he's able to talk his way out of being immediately killed by the mob leader since they know his identity. He is then drugged and then taken away to a new location. A new leader, Mutton Kylegate, attempts to pry him for information on his plans for Midgar, but without intel from the Turks, Rufus is not able to give him anything of value, other than his general plans to build a new city. While being treated courteously at first, eventually, Mutton becomes violent, severely abusing Rufus and demands to know the passkey to the old Shinra building, which he isn't able to provide since it was changed by the Turks after Rufus was kidnapped. Rufus deduces that Mutton works for the Shinra army and was a man of considerable wealth. Mutton reveals that he and Rufus have seen each other many times. He's clearly resentful towards Rufus for not even recognizing him, and it shows in his increasingly violent temperament. He's told that indeed a new city is being built near where Midgar once stood, and that it will be his city, and leaves to attend to a visitor. In an ensuing commotion, a fire breaks out, and Mutton is killed by the original mob leader. Rufus fights with him until a doctor, Killmister, shoots him dead, saving Rufus. With his gun pointed and smoke filling the room, he tells Rufus that his help is needed and that he will take him to someplace else. After Rufus is drugged again, he wakes up in the back of a truck with 9 other people and sees they are infected with some sort of disease that causes them to be covered in a sticky black substance. This is the first appearance of Geostigma to Rufus. He and the group arrive at a cave stocked with hospital beds and supplies, and whose entrance is on a steep cliff, requiring a ladder to get in or out. Here he finds out that Killmister is the doctor at Calm, and the cave is to serve as a makeshift hospital for quarantine purposes due to the disease. When he receives treatment for his injuries, he asks the doctor why he was brought there since he is not infected with the disease, to which the doctor answers, Genova. This surprises Rufus, and the doctor further explains that the infected patients have cells resembling that of members of Soldier, but he won't tell Rufus if it's contagious. About 3 months later, Rufus moves about the cave and sees some of the original members of the group have died. When Rufus is able to remove the bandages and casts from his body, Killmister tells Rufus he wants some things from within Shinra. Rufus asks him to elaborate, and Killmister tells him he wants Hojo's equipment as well as Genova. Rufus tells him he doesn't know of Genova's whereabouts. When Killmister says the cave is no longer suitable for research, Rufus surmises that Killmister is not a doctor, but a scientist. He also discovers that the doctor's treatment, a Shinra stimulant, only suppresses the pain of those infected. And while Killmister isn't infected, he uses the stimulant to work overnight, but becomes addicted. Rufus is able to leverage this addiction by insisting he contact the Turks, since they know where it's stored in Midgar. He writes a note instructing the Turks to assist him. Killmister then leaves to deliver the message, leaving Rufus behind with the other surviving patients with dwindling supplies. Days pass, and neither Killmister or the Turks arrive, much to the chagrin of the remaining people, whose health is deteriorating. Torrential rain begins to fall, and after a while, the cave starts to flood. Realizing evacuation is needed, Rufus believes if enough water seeps in, he can swim to the top and get help. He runs in and tells everyone to prepare to evacuate, and when he receives no answer, he goes back and carries each and every one as close to the entrance as possible. He then assembles makeshift flotation devices and instructs everyone to swim if they are able, or float if needed. The water continues to rise, and Rufus is almost high enough to reach the edge, but it stops suddenly. He looks around, and there are less people than from a few hours before. He worries how many more will die. Hours pass, and he can feel his body temperature dropping, knowing he has little time left. He hears something call out to him and sees a black substance creeping in the water. It makes its way to him, covering his suit, his body, and then his head. He's soon overcome completely as he cries out, until he loses consciousness. When he awakens again, He sees only 2 other survivors remain, a man and a woman. Killmister returns and offers a ladder up to help everyone escape. Rufus calls out to tell them help has arrived. As they make their way up, the woman is shot dead by Killmister. The man goes to help, but Rufus stops him, telling him he must think of nothing but survival. The man is distraught and wants revenge, and Rufus asks his name, which is Judd, and then tells him he'll take care of Killmister. Rufus continues to climb the ladder when he is fraught with a searing pain and hacks up a black substance. He realizes now he shows the signs of the illness that the other patients have. As he nears the edge, he sees Killmister get grabbed and realizes Reno has come to save him. Rufus is then brought to an old Shinra property, Cliff Resort, that served as a getaway for employees. It has long since been abandoned and becomes another makeshift hospital for those affected with the disease. In between bouts of fever, Rufus instructs his Turks to build a monument at the center of the new developing city, Edge, to commemorate the survival of Meteor. Shinra, unsurprisingly, is blamed for the events and the aftermath of Meteor Fall. In the ensuing months, Reeve pools resources into the building of the new city and provides supplies to the residents, while simultaneously, Rufus stakes Shinra's claim to the place with the new monument. Rufus also secures more supplies to create the stimulants needed to kill the pain of the infected people, and begrudgingly continues to give resources to Killmister to continue to do research in finding a cure. After 2 years, Rufus finally asks what the relation between Genova and the disease is. He finds a common component in that the patients become resigned to their deaths before contracting the disease. Additionally, the samples show similar characteristics members of Soldier had, including Sephiroth. Killmister relays thoughts of continuing Professor Hojo's work to create something beyond Sephiroth, and abandons the idea of curing those with the disease. Rufus, who himself has the disease, leaves the meeting. Killmister is found dead the next day, killed by Judd. Song inquires where Judd received a firearm, but Judd will not say, but it is implied that it was Rufus. Song reports back to Rufus, who tells him that their number 1 priority is to find Genova and secure it, that it is Shinra's goal to keep it from falling into the wrong hands. The novella closes with Rufus overseeing Healing Lodge's construction, built on top of Cliff Resort's structure, and where Cloud would later meet him in the film. Reno asks what healing means, and Rufus iterates that it means to heal the world. Rufus's story picks up again in Advent Children, where he attempts to enlist Cloud as a bodyguard as they're being targeted by a Sephiroth remnant, Kadaj, but is rebuffed. He's kidnapped, again, by Kadaj, who demands to know the location of Genova, with the intention of resurrecting Sephiroth. This is Rufus's biggest fear, as it is Sephiroth's willpower in the lifestream that is causing the plague. Rufus continually tells Kadaj he doesn't know where the remains are, again biding his time and planning his next move. When Kadaj summons Bahamut Sin to the city, Rufus reveals he has been carrying the remains all along and tosses it from atop a building, leaping after it and shooting it in the process. He's saved by his Turks and subsequently healed of his Geostigma by Aerith's healing rain. And while he isn't seen in the game Dirge of Cerberus, it is heavily implied, if not outright stated, that he is helping to fund the World Regenesis organization, continuing his work of repentance to the planet behind the scenes.
Quite a bit of lore, eh? So let's start to break this down. Rufus does not start off as a blank slate as we're introduced to his character. He's definitely a bad guy, but was he always that way? How did that come to pass? And how does he become better? One of the more fascinating parts about Rufus's character that's not really touched on anywhere in the games is the relationship he had with his father. Granted, I wouldn't expect someone like President Shinra to have the warmest personality, and it's clear Rufus is not that upset that he's dead. But in a brief flashback to his childhood, a 5-year-old Rufus expresses concern about his father's safety and becomes immediately apologetic when his father tells him his escape chute idea is foolish. This is a critical part of his character development. In the present, Rufus is a much colder individual as an adult, showing little regard for others' well-being as long as the results he wants are achieved.
But Rufus did show early on that he could express compassion for others, but all it got him was humiliation from his own father. And while it's never stated when it happened, Rufus's mother died at some point early in his life, so it's entirely likely Rufus looked for affection from someone that simply wasn't going to give it, and thus never received it. He learned early on that showing concern for others would just lead to criticism and his father viewing him as weak. It's clear that Rufus's coldness developed from his early life and only grew from there, especially towards his father. He grew to despise him to the point he considered him a liability and wanted him killed. Even as an adult, he doesn't seem to want to refer to him as his father, rather just the old man, or Mr. President when addressing him directly. But all of this is standard fare for a character like Rufus, a cold upbringing where one must hide empathy to avoid perception of weakness to the point where it becomes non-existent. Being in a prominent position of an extremely powerful corporation is almost assuredly going to lead to a ruthless individual, and it's clear that he wasn't always like that, and his concern for his father's safety actually wound up saving himself in the end. And the L's plastered all over the safe room, continuing to mock Rufus even after he's dead, only makes Rufus laugh. As an adult, he's shown to not really like talking about his father. But more heartbreaking is that there is a hint that his father did have some sort of love for him and was trying to hide it as well, evidenced by the fact that he used the day of Rufus's birth as his passcode for all of his important codes, including in the shelter. Rufus even thinks internally that using his birthday is admitting defeat, showing Rufus that believing his father hated him his whole life was what made him feel it was okay for him to try to have him eliminated. It's such a small part in the story, but it reveals so many layers to his character. He wanted to believe his father hated him. He wanted to believe that one's worth is only in how much power you have, and all of this comes right after he stares death in the face, and not for the first time. This is where the rediscovery of empathy begins. So what happens to Rufus after this? He is met with physical limitations due to his injuries in the immediate aftermath of Meteor Fall, but that doesn't stop him from taking charge. He immediately instructs his Turks to give him intel in order to decide what to do from there. While in calm, for the first time in his life, he feels vulnerable since he's not able to hide behind the Shinra army or in the Shinra building. In fact, he had a habit of choosing the interior-most areas of places, likely because that's where he felt most safe. But he doesn't let that fear get to him. In fact, in this situation, he sees the entirety of the destruction and resolves to do whatever he can to make things right. We're gonna put a pin in that last quote. In his second kidnapping since before Crisis, he comes face to face with an operative within his company that he met several times, but never registered him as a person. He's clearly bitter that to Rufus, he was just another troop, to which Rufus is apologetic, never understanding how his apathy affected people. He's presumably never come face to face with someone on the ground before, and sees firsthand the frustration of his employees. Yet Rufus also seems to resent the fact that Mutton refers to his subordinates, even Rufus's, as lapdogs. A far cry from the person who, just months before, had no qualms about controlling the population with fear. After Mutton's death and the third kidnapping by Dr. Killmister, Rufus comes face to face with ordinary citizens infected with the then unknown disease, Geostigma. During his recovery in the cave, he sees some people dying off and others in pain, and Rufus tries some sort of effort to help them, or at least comfort them, though he isn't sure why. Despite not learning their names, Rufus is empathetic towards them. What I find very fascinating is that, in that cave, he doesn't even think of himself as the president, or that he deserves better treatment than everyone else. Despite not being infected yet, he resigns himself as just one of Killmister's quarantine patients. When the cave begins to flood, a barely able-bodied Rufus picks up the sick residents and tries to bring them to safety, even if it's a futile effort. And while he doesn't make an effort to learn their names, possibly because he doesn't feel the need to do so, he is relieved when he sees them still alive when he previously thought them dead. He doesn't question his relief, but doesn't understand it either. Up until this point, and not since the diamond weapon attack, Rufus doesn't think about dying. He only thinks about survival. He concerns himself with his next move, or biding his time until he can be helped or escape. But as he is floating in the flooded cave, he thinks that the end has finally come for him. It's at this moment he contracts Geostigma. After his rescue and during his recovery at Cliff Resort, Rufus goes into action and instructs his Turks to build a monument at the center of the new city. Remember that pin I mentioned? Rufus decides to erect a monument celebrating the planet's victory in stopping Meteor. This monument is also meant to stake Shinra's place. The city, Edge, began construction under the cruel Shinra army lead, Mutton, who dubbed it his city. I may be reading too deeply into this, but Rufus staking Shinra's claim on the city to keep it from falling under leadership of another cruel individual seems calculated. Advent Children Complete also alludes to another reason.
I suppose we're no good at facing our memories. We'd rather gild the past. Find something worthwhile among the rubble and build a future with that.
And that's why you salvaged Mother? To gild the past?
Rufus gathers as many resources and people to make more of the stimulant for the infected. He also tolerates Killmister and his demands for having as much of the stimulant drug as possible, seeing him as a necessary evil to have around in hopes he'll find a cure if he's provided with the proper resources. However, when Killmister urges Rufus to find Genova's remains for him and mentions he wants to create something beyond Sephiroth, he has him killed. Rufus urges Song to find Genova and secure it, knowing others will be looking for it, and the damage that can be done if it fell into the wrong hands. Personally, I think this is the largest growth we see from Rufus. Rather than allowing Killmister to attempt to create a new Sephiroth, possibly succeeding in putting Shinra back on top with a powerful army of sorts, he decides he must keep Genova hidden at all cost to prevent its misuse. He doesn't want to go back to the old way, seeing how much the old way, his family's company, was responsible for everything. Rufus himself could have faded into obscurity, lived out the rest of his life in hiding, and let the public decide its own fate. But he doesn't. He uses his position of wealth to correct the sins of himself and his family.
I acknowledge that Shinra owes the planet a lot. It goes without saying that my company and I are the ones who put the world in the sorry state it's in. Therefore, it's our responsibility to set things right.
And moreover, Rufus takes preemptive action in preventing another travesty from occurring. When Kadaj and his gang attempt to resurrect Sephiroth, he tries his best to stave them off, saying he tried looking for Genova's remains but found nothing. He even turns to his former adversary, Cloud, to protect him, as he did indeed have the remains on him, something he probably never dreamed of doing before. Rufus probably wanted to keep a low profile and let most of the world believe he's dead, when previously it's implied he relished being in the public eye when he could. And when Geostigma is cured, he goes back to being unseen in his efforts to help others, by way of anonymously donating to the WRO. And what of his personal connections? Does Rufus have the capacity to hold anyone dear? Yes, he holds his Turks in high regard and respect. It's never stated that he considers them family, or even friends. However, it can be inferred that he does indeed care about them when he's visibly unnerved being shown Elena and Song's bloody badges by Kadaj. And that they care about him when they refuse to abandon him and are there to witness his healing. Rufus at the start can arguably be seen as nothing more than a one-layered, cold-hearted villain with no redeeming qualities other than his sense of fashion and humorous troll-like behavior. But digging deeper, you find so much more. You find someone that cared deeply for those close to him, but chose to ignore those feelings in order to cope, as that was simply the environment in which he grew. He comes off as arrogant and only cares about he and his company sustaining its influence over the planet's populace. Now don't get me wrong, his methods, especially early on, are callous and even desperate. Yet through all this, through all he endures, he comes to the conclusion that he had his own part to play in the world's almost destruction, never attempting to pass blame onto his predecessors. And he comes to it on his own. He doesn't need to have some grand speech told to him by his enemies, and he doesn't need some big aha moment or realization.
He is increasingly humbled by circumstances beyond his control and does all he can to do the right thing in the most dire of circumstances. And most fascinatingly, through the people he meets and interactions he has, he rediscovers empathy. He rediscovers what it means to be concerned for other people and that they have their own motives and means to survive, and most importantly, that he can help them. His empathy wound up saving him with the escape route, it wound up saving Judd in the cave, and then continued to help save others from Sephiroth in the wake of Geostigma. And instead of exacting revenge on all who have done him harm, he uses his time and resources to help the people displaced by Shinra Company and Meteor, since it was their doing that drove them to desperation in the first place. Rufus at his core can be seen as a man that has questionable means to achieve an end, but he does no doubt develop a moral code that grew from his experiences in facing death, destruction, violence, and loss, and he does it in a subtle way too. He doesn't make grand gestures in showing how great he is and how helpful he's being. He's largely doing it out of the public eye. And this is why Rufus Shinra is one of the most well-developed characters in Final Fantasy VII and perfectly encapsulates the redemption arc. He's not a typical sympathetic villain, the antagonist for whom you have a grudging pity because he had a sad life. He's a redeemed villain. He acknowledges his part in his family's wrongdoings and makes a concerted effort to be better and continue to do better, instead of having just a cop-out of him sacrificing himself in a heroic manner or bravely dying. He doesn't pay for redemption. He earns it. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Harvey McLeod, and I'm here to make videos for you. And I'll see y'all next time.